Hello everyone. Today I would like to just show you a quick miniature, and also the main topic of this video is to discuss my ideas on the often debate of who is the um, best player or strongest player of all time. Now, first I would like to say that I think that of course it's impossible to say unless they all played each other, which is impossible. And secondly, I would like to say I think that the best way, to determine who the best player was or is to uh, contrast them with the contemporary contrast and compare them with the contemporaries of their of their time periods. Um, so that you're not comparing, say, Gary Kasparov with Fischer, right? Or you're not comparing Gary Kasparov with Capablanca and things of that nature. When people say, ask me, who do I think is better, Kasparov or Bobby Fischer? To me, it's a no-brainer. Of course, Kasparov is better because he came later on and he was able to see every Fischer game that was published. He had the improved technology, et cetera, et cetera. So I think it's a ludicrous argument when you compare players that never had a chance to play each other and in uh, different time periods. I like to use compare the players with within their time period and the dominance that they showed amongst their peers, and then you can actually compare that dominance between eras. To me, it's like when you compare players from different eras arbitrarily, like you said, who's better, Capablanca or Magnus Carlsen, or something like that. It's like saying, what's better, 2017, Maserati or the Model T Ford. It's something like that. It's just a ludicrous argument. It's like saying, comparing the first uh, space launch, the first time walking on the moon with the technology of today. Like, yes, that was an awesome feat back in '69. When there was the moon landing. But to say, oh yeah, that rocket ship was better than we had today, it's obvious that it's ludicrous. But for some reason, people feel like with chess that you can compare, or sports in general, that you can compare um, players from different time periods and generations. If people do it in football, basketball, like who was better, Michael Jordan or to be like Magic Johnson or well, at least they got a chance to play together. But they'll say like who's better, like Michael Jordan or Kareem Abdul-Jabbar and stuff like that. They played in totally different eras. So to me, that idea, it's fun to do, of course, like comparing Tal and Kasparov. But again, it's just that it just makes it ludicrous because again, each generation benefits from the last generation. A player like Aaron Nimzovich, he benefited off what Paul Morphy did, and then a player like Anatoly Karpov benefited off the works of Aaron Nimzovich, and so on and so forth. And Magnus Carlsen benefited off Kasparov, and so on and so forth. So with that said, I would like to say, in my opinion, of course, opinions are like what, everybody has one. But in my opinion, I think using the criteria of dominance over his contemporaries, I think that my favorite player, I think is and the best player is probably Paul Morphy. His dominance over his contemporaries was just absolutely incredible. And again, if you just isolate some of Paul Morphy games, some of the moves made by his opponents are outright ridiculous. And that's why a lot of people detract from Morphy, like, oh, he wasn't that good. Look at the blunders these guys were making. But if you take it into context and you take the general chess knowledge of the time, a lot of these guys, there's really was no such thing as chess professional back in the 1800s. You got the guys that were closest to professionals. They were like stockbrokers and stuff on the side, and playing chess. It wasn't like today, but guys were like poets and like working in the theater and all type of stuff. Um, it was like guys were involved in like oil deals and things like that. Oil wells and playing chess on the side. But again, I look at this is how I look at Paul Morphy, right? I say let's use just numbers for example. Let's say from 0 to 10, right? Let's say that the chess knowledge at the time was at a 3. Okay, so that's like your general chess knowledge. I would have to say Paul Morphy was probably like at 9, or when he came. So my question to people when they say, "Oh, Paul Morphy not that good. Look at his competition, etc." Is how did he get so much better than the competition? How is he so far advanced from his peers that he dominated not only in the United States, but he went to Europe. He went to the rest of the chess world at the time and dominated over there to where he was crowned the unofficial chess champion of the world. They were called, if you read the old newspaper articles or you read there's an old book, I think it's in public domain now, it's so old. I think it's called not the Pride and Sorrow of Chess. That's a good book too, but there's another one older than that. I think it's called The Exploits of Paul Morphy in Europe. He was considered the greatest of all time, even while he was still living. Players like Adolf Anderson, um, they already had gave him the title, and they were calling him the chess champion of the world. And he basically exhausted. He was so dominant. He beat all the top players at the time. Everybody that would play him, right? That wasn't scared or made excuses. He beat all the top players. Went to Europe, and he wasn't even that serious about chess. He wanted to start a law practice. That's another story. And his law practice never kicked off because by the time he got back, from his triumphs around 1858 and stuff like that, the Civil War was starting, and that kind of like broke into him trying to start a law practice. Then the Civil War was over. He never really, got taken seriously. All his clients wanted to say, "Hey, aren't you the great Paul Morphy?" and talk about chess. And he looked at chess as almost like kind of like with a little disdain, like as as gamblers are looked on. Let me take that back. He didn't look at chess like that. He looked at trying to make chess as a living, like as a low kind of occupation. So as long as he played for fun and things like that, it was okay. And this is why Paul Morphy wouldn't take any prizes or purses for chess because he looked at it as solely social engagement. But his dominance over his contemporaries was just like as if he and I think GM Ben Feingold said it best. He said like Paul Morphy came from another planet or another time period and went back in time and played these guys. That's how far advanced he was um, from the second best chess player in the world, who's probably Staunton, somebody like that. Like Staunton or Paulson, somebody like that. He was so far ahead of everyone, and so that's how I judge by just keeping him in his era and him versus the players of his era because a man can't help where he's born. So I put Morphy as the top. Um, Now, see, again, now like somebody like Kasparov again was great. Nobody's saying he wasn't great, but look at the dominance over his contemporaries. He always had Anatoly Karpov. I mean, right behind him. These guys played like 100 and I think 121 classical games, some ridiculous number like that, and Kasparov is like barely ahead because you're talking about two all-time greats. But Kasparov was dominant, but I wouldn't say his dominance was like Morphy's dominance. Like he was definitely dominant. I mean, he held the title for 15 years. There was never a dispute of who was the number one player during that time. But Karpov was always right behind him. And then um, you had in the 80s, you had Karpov was behind him. Then you had like players like Yusupov and Jan Timman, right? Even Nigel Short was pretty high ranked at the time. You had players like Valery Salov. You know, this is in the 80s. Then in the 90s, those players started to kind of fade a little bit, and then you had the young crop, which was consisted of Ivan Chuck, Anand, Kramnik. Who else? Did I leave anybody out? Oh, Shirov, Alexei Shirov. You know, that was like your young 90s crew coming up, and Kasparov was still dominant through the 90s. And but again, I wouldn't say his dominance was so far above the rest of the players where it was this huge gap. I mean, there was a gap. So that's why I had to put Kasparov lower than Fischer, because Fischer to me had a bigger gap between his rivals. When Fischer hit his peak, we'll say about 1966, 67 to when he won the world championship, nobody was beating Fischer. Nobody was touching Fischer in the match. I mean, that guy, when he hit that peak those couple of years, there was a tremendous gap. So I put Morphy number one, and then I put Fischer number two after that. And then maybe number three, Kasparov. So that's just my food for thought on that subject. Again, everybody's entitled to opinion. All right. Let me show you this game. This game is this is from New Orleans, 1850, between Jay McConnell, who was a strong amateur player at the time, versus Paul Morphy. And I want to show this game because Paul Morphy is often noted for, being a master, mastering and being one of the first players to perfect the open games. But my research and study of Paul Morphy shows that he understood all aspects of chess. He understood the open games and closed games very well. And I'm going to show you an example of that right now. So e4, e6, he's playing the French. d4, he plays d5. McConnell goes for e5. And look at this game. Remember, this game is played in 1850. c5. Now, this is before Nimzovich, right? Nimzovich is not even born yet. Here's Morphy showing an understanding about attacking the pawn at his base. c3, knight c6, putting more pressure on the base. Again, before my system comes out, before any theory is written down, like, oh, you got to attack a pawn chain at his base, that's the weakest point, etc., etc., we see Morphy already showing the understanding. f4 by McConnell, already a weakening move. It's too many pawn moves, and he's committed too many pawns on one square color. The dark squares, which means the light squares, are weak. Did Morphy take here? No, he just puts more practice. Look how modern this game looks. Right? He's playing like he stepped in the time machine and went back to 1850. Knight f3. Bishop d7. Again, looks like it could just be a modern game. a3. And now what does he do? He doesn't want to block the bishop on e7. In case this pawn is taken, he can just swing it out here with the bishop. So therefore, he plays knight h6. Again, modern. And we know what the idea is. All of us that, are familiar with this pawn structure, put the knight on f5, more pressure on d4. Because this pawn structure constitutes an advantage for white in the center, a space advantage. As long as it can stay intact. So that's basically the crux of Black's game. He has to tear that down. This is b4. C takes d4. C takes d4. Again, rook c8. Just beautiful. Modern looking play by Morphy. Remember, the year's 1850. Right? No internet, no database. Right? No ICC chess club, no chess 24, none of that. Nobody to give you lessons, right? No internet teaching. That's why I love looking at these old games, because these players were extremely strong. Knight f5. Okay, again, you see Morphy showing a complete understanding about the pawn chain and these closed this is the land. You got to remember, this is the era of the King's Gambit, Evans Gambit, Danish Gambit. You know, players players smoking at the chessboard. You know, there'd be like 20 guys huddled around the chessboard, no time clocks. You know, guys. It's like a different era, but we see this modern play by Morphy. And also, if you research Paul Morphy, he played very fast. A lot of times, players would take hours and hours, because they had no clocks. Players would take long time on the move, and Morphy was moving instantly. He would play his game in like an hour. The other person would take 5, 6 hours and get crushed. So here, Queen D3 is played. Okay, and Morphy finds a brilliant move. Okay, and remember, the key to finding this move is what I told you earlier about the pawns being committed. Too many pawns committed on the dark squares. Because what happens is when you commit your pawns on too many pawns on one color complex, the opposite color complex must become weak. And we can see the light squares right are very weak in this position. Okay, and so Morphy is going to exploit that on this move. Right, this another feature is that this bishop on b2 is unprotected. So bishop takes b4 check. A takes b4. Knight takes b4, attacking the queen. And there's that light square weakness I was telling you about. On c2, the queen has to move. And guess what? Light squares. Glad to meet you. Rook c2. Queen d1 was played by McConnell. And then Morphy just hopped in with knight e3. And that was a wrap. And the game was over. So, like I said, that was just a little, miniature there. I hope you enjoyed that. And please like and subscribe. And I would love to hear your opinions on who you think the strongest chess player was, or greatest chess player, or even your favorite chess player. Um, but it's just something I wanted to chime in on. So anyway, please like and subscribe, and I'll see you on the next video.